Okay, this guy was at home with his wife watching television.
Man, you know the walk. That signature George Jefferson strut that made everybody laugh. The little guy from South Philly who made it to the penthouse on TV and into the hearts of millions. But behind that swagger and those perfect comedic beats was a quiet man. A shy soul who never seemed comfortable with the spotlight he earned. Sherman Hemsley wasn't just a funny actor, he was a cultural force, breaking barriers for black success on television. Yet, when the cameras stopped rolling, the fame faded fast, and he disappeared from Hollywood's radar. So, what really happened to Sherman Hemsley, the man who made America move on up? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Sherman Alexander Hemsley was born on the 1st of February 1938 in South Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a neighborhood filled with jazz, corner stores, and hard lessons about life. His mother, Lydia, worked at a lamp factory, raising him alone after his father left when he was still a toddler. Growing up in a single-parent household during the 1940s wasn't easy, especially for a young black kid trying to find his place in a segregated city. Money was tight, but imagination, that was endless. Man, South Philly had that energy music blasting from stoops, kids cracking jokes on the block, rhythm in every step. Sherman soaked it all in. He wasn't the loudest kid, but he was the one watching, listening, studying people's moves. That observation skill would later become his superpower on stage. He went to Barrett Junior High School and then Bach Technical High, but books couldn't hold him for long. What really caught his heart was performing. Even as a shy boy, he loved the way laughter could light up a room. When the neighborhood kids put on little skits, Sherman would join in quiet at first, but once he got that first laugh, man, it was over. That spark never left him. But let's be real, the world outside that block was tough. Racism and class barriers were real, and opportunities for young black men were limited. After high school, Sherman joined the United States Air Force. He served 4 years, mostly stationed in Alaska. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave him discipline and a sense of independence he'd carry forever. When he got out, he went back to Philly and took a steady job at the post office. It paid the bills, but inside, he knew that wasn't his destiny. You could find him sorting letters by day and dreaming by night. He'd spend evenings sneaking into local theaters, watching performers work the crowd. He started thinking, I can do that. But it wasn't confidence that drove him, it was curiosity. How did they do it? How did they make people laugh so easily? Those South Philly nights taught him timing, rhythm, and humility. He once said later in life that growing up there gave him everything: the swagger, the realness, and that street charm he'd bring to every role. Folks in the neighborhood used to say, Sherman always walked like he had a rhythm in his feet, and years later, that walk became iconic. Still, his path to show business wasn't clear yet. Acting seemed like a distant dream for someone working behind a post office counter. But even then, he was planting seeds, telling jokes at work, imitating his supervisors, making everyone laugh during breaks. People started saying, you missed your calling, man. You should be on stage. And deep down, he knew they were right. The boy from South Philly had the soul of a performer. He just needed a stage big enough for the world to see it. Working full-time at the post office gave Sherman stability, but it didn't feed his spirit. Every envelope he sorted felt like one more reminder that he was living someone else's dream. Still, he never lost that South Philly spark. Even after long shifts, he'd grab a quick bite and head straight to acting classes at night. He enrolled at the Academy of Dramatic Arts in Philadelphia, paying tuition out of his own pocket. That's real dedication, man. Most people would have gone home to rest. Sherman went to chase a dream. He didn't have fancy clothes or an agent. What he had was raw timing and a face people remembered. One of his teachers once told him, Sherman, you don't need to act, just be. And that advice stuck with him forever. He learned how to pull comedy from truth, how to use silence like a punchline. After a few local performances, he decided to take a leap of faith and move to New York City. Picture it, the late 1950, Harlem and Manhattan buzzing with jazz, art, and theater. Sherman took a transfer with the Postal Service so he could work during the day and study drama at night. He auditioned for small theater productions, off-Broadway stuff, nothing glamorous, just pure grind. He joined the group Negro Ensemble Company, which would later become legendary for shaping the next generation of black actors. Back then, though, it was just a tight-knit group of dreamers, writing their own stories because Hollywood wasn't giving them a chance. Sherman fit right in. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing the craft. In 1967, he landed a role in the musical Pearlie, based on a play by Ossie Davis. That was his first real taste of Broadway life. He toured across the country, performing night after night, sharpening his skills. People who saw him back then said he had this quiet fire, not loud, but magnetic. He could make a simple line hit like a punch. Those years taught him what it meant to survive as an artist. He lived in small apartments, took odd jobs between gigs, sometimes wondering if he'd made a mistake leaving Philly. But every time he stepped on stage, the doubts disappeared. And here's the wild part: while doing theater in New York, Sherman caught the attention of a man who would change his life forever. Norman Lear, the TV producer behind All in the Family. Lear saw something in Sherman that few others did: a natural sense of rhythm, honesty, and comedic genius. The quiet mailman from Philly was about to become one of television's loudest and most unforgettable voices. When Norman Lear first met Sherman Hemsley, he wasn't looking for a typical TV actor. He wanted someone real, someone who could bring a character to life with grit and rhythm. Lear was casting a new sitcom called All in the Family, built around Archie Bunker, a working-class white man with outdated, often racist views. Lear needed someone who could go toe-to-toe with Archie, someone who could push back but still make audiences laugh. That's when Sherman walked in. He was still performing in Pearlie on Broadway at the time, so Lear had to wait nearly 2 years for him to finish the show before joining All in the Family. Man, that tells you something. Lear knew Sherman was the one. He told people, "I don't want anyone else playing George Jefferson but him." When Sherman finally stepped onto that set in 1973, it was electric. George Jefferson wasn't just another character, he was the opposite of Archie Bunker. He was proud, ambitious, sometimes arrogant, and absolutely fearless about confronting prejudice. But the magic came from how Sherman played him. He didn't make George hateful, he made him human. That was the secret sauce. The audience loved it instantly. Every time he strutted into a scene, chest out, chin up, doing that little dance walk, people went wild. That walk became his trademark, the George Jefferson walk. It wasn't scripted. It came straight from Sherman's own rhythm, his South Philly swagger mixed with a bit of comic exaggeration. It made the character unforgettable. Even Carol O'Connor, who played Archie, said that Sherman brought a new kind of energy to the show. Their back and forth was lightning in a bottle, sharp, funny, and socially charged. You had two men from completely different worlds clashing, yet both believable. That dynamic turned All in the Family from a good sitcom into a cultural conversation. But here's the thing, Sherman didn't act like a rising star. Between takes, he kept to himself, soft-spoken and polite. Co-stars said he was almost shy, nothing like the loud, fast-talking George Jefferson. That contrast amazed everyone. It was proof that his talent wasn't just natural, it was crafted, studied, precise. By 1974, George Jefferson had become such a fan favorite that CBS decided to spin him off into his own show. Think about that, a black businessman from Queens getting his own sitcom during that era. That was revolutionary. And Sherman, the former postal worker who took acting classes after dark, was now leading man material. He once said in an interview, "I wanted George to be someone we could laugh at, but also someone we could respect." And that's exactly what he did. George Jefferson wasn't perfect. He was stubborn, proud, sometimes insecure, but he represented something bigger. He showed audiences that a black man could be successful, funny, complicated, and unapologetically himself. So from a mailroom in Philadelphia to the main stage of American television, Sherman Hemsley had officially arrived. The world was about to meet George Jefferson, and television would never be the same again. When the Jeffersons premiered on CBS in January 1975, no one expected it to become one of the most iconic sitcoms in American history. The show was a direct spin-off from All in the Family, but this time, the spotlight was fully on George and Louise "Wheezy" Jefferson, a black couple who had finally moved on up from Queens to Manhattan's East Side. The opening theme song said it all. Well, we're moving on up to the East Side. It became an anthem of pride and possibility for millions of viewers who had never seen a successful black family portrayed like that on TV before. Sherman Hemsley didn't just play George Jefferson, he became him. From that confident walk to the high-pitched, fast-talking voice, every move was his own creative invention. The character was written as brash and hot-headed, but Sherman gave him heart. He made George's ambition funny, his anger understandable, and his love for Wheezy real. People laughed at him, but they also rooted for him. Working alongside Isabel Sanford, who played his wife Louise, was pure magic. Their chemistry felt lived in, like they had been married for decades. Isabel, who was actually 20 years older than Sherman, brought a balance to his fire, calm, wise, loving, but never afraid to clap back. The two shared a rhythm that couldn't be taught. Viewers saw themselves in that marriage, the arguments, the tenderness, the loyalty beneath the noise. The supporting cast also added flavor: Marla Gibbs as Florence the sassy maid, Roxy Roker as Helen Willis, and Franklin Cover as Tom Willis, forming one of TV's first interracial couples. The show pushed boundaries every week. It wasn't afraid to tackle issues like racism, class, colorism, and success in America, but it did it with sharp humor and humanity. Sherman became a household name. That George Jefferson walk, man, it was everywhere. Kids imitated it at school, adults laughed about it at work, and comedians copied it on late-night shows. It wasn't just a walk, it was a statement. I made it. But here's the thing, even with all the fame, Sherman didn't live like a Hollywood star. He stayed out of the tabloids, avoided red carpets, and rarely gave interviews. When fans met him, they were shocked at how humble he was. He was so soft-spoken, people would say. So polite, nothing like George. Behind the scenes, Sherman worked hard to make sure his character never became a stereotype. He fought for George to be shown as a business owner, a man who built something from the ground up. The Jefferson Dry Cleaners wasn't just a prop, it was a symbol. It showed that black success wasn't fantasy, it was achievable. During its 11-season run, The Jeffersons aired over 250 episodes, making it one of the longest-running sitcoms in television history. It became a cornerstone of black representation on TV, paving the way for shows like The Cosby Show, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Blackish. And yet, despite all that success, Sherman remained underrated. Critics often praised the show but overlooked him during award seasons. He was nominated once for an Emmy in 1984, just one time. One. That's wild, considering he carried one of the most successful shows of its era. Still, he didn't seem bitter. He once said, "I just wanted to make people laugh, man." And he did week after week, year after year. By the time The Jeffersons ended in 1985, Sherman Hemsley had become a cultural icon. He made America laugh, think, and dance, sometimes all in the same episode. But as the spotlight dimmed, the next chapter of his life would reveal just how much being George Jefferson had cost him. By the late 1970s, The Jeffersons had become more than just a sitcom. It was a mirror of black excellence, pride, and survival. Every Thursday night, millions of families gathered around their TVs to watch George Jefferson strut across that luxurious Manhattan apartment, proving that black success could exist right next to white privilege. And that, man, was powerful. When the show first aired, it was rare to see a black man portrayed as a confident business owner, not a sidekick, not a caricature, but the boss. George Jefferson represented something new, a man who had worked his way out of the ghetto, built his own business, and refused to apologize for his success. For a country still wrestling with racial tension after the Civil Rights era, that image hit deep. Sherman Hemsley became an accidental revolutionary. His character didn't march or give speeches. He cracked jokes, argued, and danced, but he did more for representation than most politicians could ever dream of. Through comedy, he showed what progress looked like. As one fan once said, "He made us laugh, but he also made us proud." The genius of Sherman's performance was how he balanced humor with truth. George could be arrogant, sometimes petty, but Sherman gave him soul. You saw the insecurities behind the attitude, a man still trying to prove himself in a world that had always told him he wasn't enough. That complexity made George feel real, and it's why fans still quote him decades later. Episodes tackled topics most sitcoms avoided: racism, class divide, even colorism within the black community. One of the most talked about moments was when George saved the life of a Ku Klux Klan member who had insulted him. When the man told George he should have let him die, George replied with a look that said everything about humanity and hypocrisy. That scene wasn't just TV, it was history in motion. Sherman's character became a voice for those who had fought for a seat at the table and finally got it. But what the Jeffersons did best was make that message funny, smart, and relatable. It let white audiences laugh with black characters instead of at them, and that's no small thing. The show ran during a time when America was changing. The 1970 saw black families moving into suburbs, starting businesses, and breaking ceilings in every field. George and Wheezy were fictional, but they felt familiar. People saw their uncles, parents, neighbors in them. That's why The Jeffersons wasn't just a comedy, it was a cultural shift. Behind all that laughter, Sherman's work was layered with quiet brilliance. He used body language like dialogue, the strut, the raised eyebrow, the side eye, all choreographed to perfection. He'd studied Chaplin, Flip Wilson, and even the blues. His timing was jazz unpredictable but perfect. When people today say, representation matters, they're really talking about moments like this, when a man from South Philly could walk onto national television and redefine what success looked like for millions of viewers. Sherman Hemsley may not have set out to change the world, but man, he did. When The Jeffersons ended abruptly in 1985, without even a proper finale, fans were heartbroken, and so was Sherman Hemsley. After 11 years of laughter and legacy, the cast found out the show was canceled through the newspapers. No send-off, no closure, just gone. For many, it was proof that even one of the most successful black sitcoms could be tossed aside without respect. But Sherman, being Sherman, didn't complain. He simply kept moving forward just like George always did. He took a short break from the spotlight and then, in 1986, came roaring back with another hit, Amen. This time, he played Deacon Ernest Fry, a scheming, money-hungry church deacon who always had a plan, a joke, and a moral lesson hidden underneath. It was classic Hemsley, loud, funny, but somehow lovable. Amen ran for 5 seasons on NBC, from 1986 to 1991, and it proved that Sherman wasn't a one-character wonder. The man had range. He took that George Jefferson energy and repackaged it into something new, more spiritual, more mature, yet just as hilarious. The show, set in a black church in Philadelphia, felt like coming home for Sherman. He once said in an interview, "I wanted to show a different side of us, not just the business side, but the community side." The chemistry between Sherman and Anna Maria Horsford, who played Thelma, was another gem. Their back-and-forth banter reminded fans of George and Wheezy, but with a Sunday morning twist. Audiences ate it up. Churchgoers across America said Amen felt like watching their own congregation funny, chaotic, and full of heart. Even as the show succeeded, Hollywood still underestimated him. He wasn't flashy, didn't chase movie roles, and didn't fit the industry's idea of a star. Some casting agents even said he was too specific, code for too black, too unique. But Sherman didn't care. He never wanted to be a superstar, he just wanted to work, to make people laugh. During the late 1980 and early 1990, he made guest appearances on shows like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Sister, and even voiced a character on Dinosaurs. Each time he showed up, fans lit up. That familiar walk, that sly grin, it was like seeing an old friend again. But here's the bittersweet part. While his characters were celebrated, Sherman himself never got the same recognition. No Lifetime awards, no big retrospectives. It was like Hollywood loved his creations but forgot the man behind them. Still, he kept a sense of humor about it. When asked about being underrated, Sherman laughed and said, "Hey, I'm moving on up just at my own pace." That humility was pure Sherman. By the time Amen ended, he had cemented himself as a 2-time TV legend, something few actors ever achieve. Yet, even with all the laughter he'd given the world, the next chapter of his life would show just how lonely fame could be when the cameras stopped rolling. For all the joy he gave the world, Sherman Hemsley lived a life of deep solitude. Off-screen, he was nothing like the loud, quick-talking characters that made him famous. Those who knew him best described him as quiet, shy, even reclusive. He didn't party in Hollywood, didn't crave red carpets, didn't hang around with the in crowd. After filming wrapped, He'd often go straight home, no entourage, no chaos, just peace and silence. Man, that's wild, right? The same guy who had America laughing every week, who strutted across TV like he owned the world, was happiest sitting alone listening to jazz records. Sherman had always been introverted, even back in Philly. He once said, "I love people, but I don't like being around a lot of them." That summed him up perfectly. He never married and had no children. While that surprised fans, it made sense for Sherman. Acting was his relationship. He gave everything he had to his craft, and maybe there wasn't room for much else. Friends said he'd occasionally talk about loneliness, but he'd laugh it off quickly, like he didn't want anyone to worry. Still, it's hard not to feel like the applause sometimes became his only company. Money, too, became a complicated subject. Despite decades of success, Sherman never lived large. He bought a modest house in El Paso, Texas, and stayed there for years far from Hollywood. He didn't care about mansions or luxury cars, he just wanted space to breathe. But because he avoided the spotlight, rumors started to spread stories about him being broke, eccentric, or even weird. In truth, Sherman simply didn't trust fame. He'd seen too many of his peers rise fast and fall even faster. Then came the tabloid whispers about his personal life. Some speculated about his sexuality, others claimed he lived as a recluse with no friends. Sherman never confirmed or denied anything, he just ignored it. He wasn't trying to explain himself to the world, he'd already done that through his work. When asked in one rare interview about the rumors, he smiled and said, "People can think whatever they want. I'm too busy living." That was classic Sherman. Calm, grounded, untouchable. But being misunderstood took its toll. Hollywood had moved on, and he wasn't getting the same kind of roles anymore. He'd still pop up for cameos, little nostalgic moments on The Fresh Prince or Family Matters, but those were reminders of what once was. To younger viewers, he was that funny old guy from back in the day. To older fans, he was a memory. Through it all, Sherman kept his dignity. He didn't complain about the lack of offers or how the industry forgot him. Instead, he leaned into his private world. He filled his days with music, everything from jazz to progressive rock and old cartoons. He collected records, painted a little, and stayed out of the chaos. That's how he liked it. Still, you can't help but wonder if all that isolation weighed on him. Fame can be loud, but silence hits harder when the laughter fades. By the time the 2000 rolled around, Sherman Hemsley had quietly slipped away from the public eye. No scandals, no comebacks, just a man who once ruled television, now living life on his own terms. And yet, there was still one final act in his story, one that would shock everyone who loved him. By the late 2000s, Sherman Hemsley had completely stepped out of the Hollywood spotlight. He was living quietly in El Paso, Texas, a far cry from the bright lights and sound stages of Los Angeles. He'd first moved there in the 1990s, drawn by the slower pace and desert calm. Locals often saw him around town, at the grocery store or the record shop, always polite, always smiling. He was just regular, one neighbor said. No bodyguards, no attitude, just Sherman. He shared his home with his longtime friend and business partner, Flora Enchinton. She managed some of his affairs and handled most of his public dealings. To outsiders, Sherman's life seemed peaceful, if a little lonely. But underneath that calm surface, age and health had started catching up with him. Years of smoking had taken their toll. On the 24th of July 2012, Sherman Hemsley passed away at his home in El Paso. He was 74 years old. The cause of death was lung cancer, specifically, a condition known as superior vena cava syndrome, which restricts blood flow to the heart. It was a quiet end for a man who had made so much noise through laughter. But even in death, the drama that had never touched him in life suddenly found him. Within days of his passing, a legal dispute erupted over his estate. Flora Enchinton claimed to be his sole heir, presenting a will that Sherman had signed just 6 weeks before he died. However, a man named Richard Thornton came forward, saying he was Sherman's half-brother and should inherit instead. The media jumped on it immediately. Headlines read, "Who really inherits George Jefferson's millions?" It was the kind of circus Sherman would have hated. The fight dragged on for months, turning into a bizarre, posthumous courtroom battle. Even his burial was delayed for more than 3 months while the courts sorted things out. It was heartbreaking the man who'd brought so much joy to the world couldn't even rest in peace. Eventually, the judge upheld the will, recognizing Flora as his rightful heir. Sherman was finally laid to rest in Fort Bliss National Cemetery, honored as a U.S. Air Force veteran. But for fans, the whole ordeal left a bitter taste. As one fan wrote online, "He made us laugh for decades, and when he passed, all people cared about was his money. That's not right." His passing made people reflect on how quietly he had lived. No entourage, no family drama until the end. He had no Hollywood mansion, no big memorial, no fancy farewell, just a small, private goodbye. But the outpouring of love from fans around the world proved that his work had never been forgotten. Social media lit up with clips of George Jefferson strutting, with fans saying things like, "Rip Sherman, you made my childhood," and "Nobody could do that walk like him." In a strange way, that was his final curtain call, not in front of a studio audience, but in the hearts of millions who had grown up laughing with him. Sherman Hemsley may have left this world quietly, but his legacy, man, that still echoes every time someone hums, "Moving on up." Even after his passing, Sherman Hemsley's spirit never really left television. Every time someone turns on the Jeffersons, that laugh, that walk, that energy still lights up the screen. He didn't just play a role, he created a blueprint. George Jefferson became one of those timeless characters, the kind that lives in pop culture long after the actor is gone. You can still see his fingerprints all over modern comedy. Shows like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Martin, Blackish, and Everybody Hates Chris owe something to Sherman's work. He showed that a black sitcom could be more than punchlines, it could be layered, confident, and socially sharp. Will Smith once said in an interview that the Jeffersons made room for all of us. That's real talk. The George Jefferson walk became one of TV's most iconic images. Think about it decades later. People still imitate it, remix it, meme it. It's more than a dance. It's attitude, resilience, and pride all rolled into one. That strut said, "I came from nothing, and now I belong here." It captured what so many people, especially African Americans during that time, felt in their own journeys. But beyond the character, Sherman Hemsley's personal humility continues to inspire. Fans who met him always said the same thing. He was kind. He listened. He smiled. He never acted like a celebrity. In fact, he often downplayed his fame. When someone called him a legend, he'd laugh and say, "Aw, man, I'm just an old mailman who got lucky." That humility made people love him even more. Actors and comedians who came after him, from Cedric the Entertainer to Anthony Anderson, have called him a trailblazer. His comedic timing, his bold delivery, his ability to turn discomfort into laughter, that's what made him special. He didn't have to yell to be funny, he just was. Still, it's bittersweet. Sherman never really got his flowers while he was alive. No Lifetime Achievement Award, no Hollywood star, no massive tributes. For someone who changed television, that's wild. But maybe that's exactly why people still talk about him today. His fans became his legacy, everyday people who remember how he made them feel. When the Jeffersons reruns play today, it's not just nostalgia, it's recognition. It reminds us that laughter can carry messages deeper than speeches. Sherman's work challenged stereotypes and celebrated Black joy in a time when the world rarely did. So yeah, he's gone, but his voice, his rhythm, his presence, they're stitched into the fabric of American TV. Every time a sitcom shows a confident Black lead, every time a joke hits just right, there's a little bit of Sherman in it. He may have left the stage quietly, but the echoes of his laughter are still moving on up. When you look back at Sherman Hemsley's life, it's hard not to feel a mix of joy and sadness. Joy, because the man gave us characters that will live forever. Sadness, because he never fully got the recognition he deserved. He made the world laugh, but behind those laughs was a man who carried himself with quiet strength, who kept his dignity when the fame faded. It's wild, man. Think about it. A mailman from South Philly becomes one of the most recognizable faces in American television. No social media, no PR machine, just pure talent and heart. He didn't need shock value or controversy to make you pay attention. He did it with timing, truth, and that unmistakable walk. And yet, the industry that he helped change barely looked back. No awards, season tributes, no Hollywood spotlight. But here's the thing, the fans never forgot. The people never forgot. They kept his memory alive in the best way possible, by laughing, remembering, and passing those moments down to new generations. You can still hear it in the comments today, people sharing stories about meeting him, how kind he was, how the Jeffersons made them feel seen for the first time. That's legacy. That's impact. Sherman Hemsley proved something bigger than fame, that greatness doesn't always need validation. Sometimes, just being true to who you are is enough. He never chased stardom, and maybe that's why it found him. Even when the spotlight dimmed, he never complained, never lost his cool. He stayed real, humble, grateful. And that's why people still talk about him. Because he wasn't just playing George Jefferson, he was channeling every person who ever fought to be respected, who ever dreamed of moving up, who ever wanted to laugh through the pain. He gave that dream a face. So, here's the question: did Sherman Hemsley ever get the credit he truly deserved? Or was he one of those rare souls who gave everything to the world and asked for nothing in return? That's up to us to decide. Maybe it's time we start giving him those flowers now in our memories, our laughter, our stories. Because every time you see a confident stride on TV, every time a sitcom shows a proud black family living their truth, every time someone laughs a little too hard at a line that cuts close to home, that's Sherman's spirit still shining through. Man, he might have left us quietly, but his laughter, it's still echoing. His impact, still inspiring. His walk, still undefeated. Rest easy, Sherman Hemsley. You helped the world move on up, and we're still following that rhythm you left behind. So, what's your favorite Sherman Hemsley moment? Drop it below, see you fam, and let's keep his story alive.